Well, this is going to be fun. I can't wait to go through some of these games. We are going to be going with lines provided by our partners at Fanduel, and it is the #1 sports book in America. And right now, you go to fanduel.com/staples. You bet $5 if you're a new customer, guaranteed $200 in bonus bets. You bet $5 if you are any customer. You could be an existing customer or a new customer. You get $100 off NFL Sunday Ticket on YouTube or YouTube TV. It's so easy. I was cruising through the FanDuel app today. Some of the stuff in the morning has changed. It's the backyard brawl flipped on us today. So it's one of those you can look at all times, and obviously anything you want to wager on, they've got it in any state where it's legal. So FanDuel.com/Staples. New customers bet $5, get $200 in guaranteed bonus bets, and all customers bet $5 get $100 off NFL Sunday Ticket. Let's get going. I want to start with some of these home underdogs, Parker, because that is the thing that I jumped out at me this weekend. That home underdogs in conference games where the spreads are actually fairly large. So let's start with one of those noon Central game or noon Eastern games. Is a 11 a.m. Central kickoff here in Stark Vegas. LSU at Mississippi State. It's a 9.5-point spread right now. LSU is a 9.5-point favorite on the road. What do you think about this game?
I've got this one just inside of a touchdown. I was a little bit underwhelmed with Mississippi State last week. Not from the overall performance. Thought they started well, but really just couldn't put away an Arizona team that I think that they're demonstrably should have been demonstrably better on the field. Obviously, we saw the result, and it was pretty close there. Definitely worried about Mississippi State's offensive identity. Again, in the beginning of the season, I'm a little bit more conservative. I regress these numbers to the mean, but Mississippi State 81st in offensive EPA per play, 34th on the defensive side. We know Zach Arnett has that side of the ball down, but really going to need to see more out of this offense against an LSU defense that, as you know, Brian Kelly said he was concerned about at the beginning of the season. I think that's something I've been watching for them is that LSU defense. The numbers are not great, 132nd in raw EPA per play. Again, that's just a descriptive metric. Obviously, they're not the 132nd worst defense in the nation, but haven't played super great. And as well, when I look at Jalen Daniels specifically, I'm worried about his ability to handle pressure. His pressure to sack ratio this season is 22.7%. Last year was over 30. When he's pressured, he does not make good decisions and does take a lot of sacks, even being that mobile with moving the ball consistently and being able to run with his legs so much. So I'm really interested in, can Mississippi State disrupt with pressure? If they're going to keep this thing within, and cover, which I slightly have with the numbers here, it's going to involve making Jaden Daniels very uncomfortable and minimizing the stakes on offense.
So my thing on this is, you mentioned Mississippi State's offense. I think they're trying to find themselves offensively. This is all so new. Will Rogers attempted 17 passes last week, which is wild. I have to look up what his lowest attempted pass total under Mike Leach was, but I'm sure it's probably in the high 30s, and that's because he got taken out because they were in a blowout. So this is such a different world for them. And as far as LSU, it's hard for me, Parker, because I was at that FSU game. I saw them get worn down defensively. And really because Florida State kept trying the run. It didn't really work very well at first. They were always successful through the air, but the run game didn't work at first. But then they wore them out as the game went on and just demolished them in the second half. I think Mississippi State probably will keep that up. This doesn't seem under Tony Barbay like an offense that's going to abandon the run. And obviously, if it were the late Pirate, he probably wouldn't be running at all. So and then one other piece of it that I'm curious about, because again, I keep framing it with that Florida State game because there's only so much you can take from Grambling, but Logan Diggs played against Grambling and he didn't play against Florida State. And it felt like LSU's run game was Jaden Daniels scramble based against Florida State. That was pretty much all they could succeed with. Logan Diggs feels like he gives them a little more option in a run game.
Yeah, absolutely. And Mississippi State's defense relatively worse against the rush in the pass, 25th in EPA per pass, 65th in EPA per rush. One other thing that I'm interested in looking at this game is I think, Andy, a lot about gravity on the field. And, Johnny Wilson at Florida State, absolute dude. They bring in Keon Coleman, and they have two guys that can really spread you out. Mississippi State's second leading receiver is Jaquavius Marks, a running back. And really, if you're trying to stretch a team out, you need a second option. I don't know who's going to emerge out of this second tier of Mississippi State wide receiver to put a credible second threat on that LSU defense, because if you can't be multidimensional, they're going to be able to key in. They're going to be able to sit back and say, we'll defend the run and make Will Rogers beat us with passes he's not comfortable making. So I think LSU can dictate a lot of the pace here if they can button up kind of that second tier of Mississippi State receiver who hasn't emerged as a single guy yet.
That's where Mississippi State really misses Ra Thomas, who's at Georgia now, who was the type of guy who could stretch the field and would have been, as a sophomore, kind of coming into his own for them. So, all right, let's put it down. Who you got?
I think that I'm going to trust my number here, and I'm going to take the home dog and go with Mississippi State. Didn't love what I saw last week, but I think they can get a get-right game here, and I think they can keep it within striking distance.
I agree. I'm tempted to say Mississippi State wins outright, but I don't feel that confident in them. But I do feel like that's a big number. So I will take 9.5 points if you're going to give them to me. So I also will take Mississippi State to cover. That's one that kind of popped off the page to me when I saw it. I just like, okay, I thought this might be a 6-point spread, but 9.5, I'm taking that one.
And that's one that when people complain, you mentioned this earlier, when people complain about the slate this week, you can just point at this game and say, like, interdivisional rivalry, beefy matchup. We're going to learn a lot about both teams. Love it.
Yeah. 11 a.m. local kick, which, again, there are different schools of thought on who that affects more, whether it's the home team or the road team. But I'm telling you, thousands of cowbells at 11 a.m. do not feel good on the ears. So hopefully LSU players get a good night's sleep, because that is going to be unpleasant. All right, let's stay on this theme. This is an even bigger number for an in-conference game with a team that had a bad week last week, but was pretty good last year against a team that I think is going to be one of the better teams in the country this year. Penn State at Illinois. Penn State's a 14.5-point favorite going into Champaign. Most of us watched, because we're psychos, the Illinois-Kansas game on a Friday. Jalen Daniels just tore up Illinois' defense, which is a little surprising to me because they have some good defensive line. Like Johnny Newton is a dude in there. But Jalen Daniels made it look easy. And then I felt like Illinois really couldn't they weren't doing with Luke Altmaier what you can do with him. It felt like they were throwing at the sideline for most of the game. They finally start throwing down the middle, and it was like bing, 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 touchdown. And then there was a great Luke Altmaier run when the game had already been decided. But I'm thinking you got to kind of unleash this guy if you're going to have a chance.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Luke Altmaier is kind of like a computer, does very well with very clear if-then statements, right? If this read's not there, bail. That's the big run was on a, it was just on an RPO with a draw there. And when he's forced to make multiple reads, I think things really get away from him on that offense. On the defensive side, we knew they were going to take a step back. We knew that with losing Ryan Walters, losing multiple NFL draft picks, we knew they're going to take a step back. I'm not sure we really expected it to bottom out like it is. 124th in EPA per play this week. One thing I'm looking at with Jalen Daniels and his performance against them last week, 46.9% of his dropbacks were play action, completed 78.6% of those, 8.4 yards per attempt, and 2 of his touchdowns there. So really, really well put together game by Lance Leipold against an Illinois defense that struggles on the back end. I talked about gravity earlier. You lose guys in the defensive backfield. It doesn't matter if your defensive line is really, really good. If you don't have guys back there, they're still going to be able to find holes. So I think that's a really big issue. I'm much less charitable to the Illinois as a home dog here than I am for Mississippi State. I think Penn State, very, very consistent team, very physical team, run the ball well, pass the ball well. Want to see a little bit stouter run defense, but I think West Virginia is a better rushing attack than most people realize. I think Illinois should win this pretty handily.
So here's my thing about Penn State in this one. I want to see how different Penn State with Drew Aller is from Penn State with Sean Clifford. And I feel like this is the kind of game that can reveal that, because Sean Clifford, Penn State offense, they come in, they probably fart around a little bit. They probably win this game by 6 or 7 points. If Drew Aller is what we think he is, which is the super high ceiling potential to make their offense very dynamic, then they blow Illinois off the field. That's what I think is going to happen. So I think we're in agreement that Penn State covers this one, and it might not be that hard. Now, the last time they met, they did play 9 overtimes and Illinois won, but that was a while back.
Yeah, and I think really it does come down to what Luke Altmaier will be able to do. You know, Reggie Love in Illinois' first game had, I think, 3.5 yards after contact. I don't think you're going to get away with that against Penn State. Altmaier is going to have to face a defensive secondary that's as smart as he is, that can really mess up those reads as well. So I'm not optimistic about Illinois moving the ball well. And I think if Penn State comes out with that killer instinct, they should put this game away early.
So matchup near and dear to your heart. We go to Houston's first Big 12 game. The Horned Frogs will welcome the Cougars to the conference. Houston is a 7.5-point dog in this game. TCU, the world saw them get depantsed by Colorado. That's the last image we recall of TCU. Houston, Dana Holgorsen apologizing to everyone after the Rice loss in double overtime. So something's got to get, like, somebody's got to get right in this game.
Yeah, you're happy to have this one on your schedule for both of these teams, I think, to have an opportunity to get a get-right game, because some bad performances from both of these teams. I think the TCU defense, we know that they lost D. Winters and Dylan Horton and Tre'Vius Hodges-Tomlinson. And those three together, I mean, just take away so much from your defense. Those three covered up so many holes on this defense. People want to say, oh, the stack's not good. And I don't think it's the personnel grouping that's out on the field, you know, how they're lining up. I think it's the fact that you don't have a guy like Dylan Horton who's so athletic and can make quarterbacks really, really uncomfortable. Donovan Smith, another mobile quarterback, a big old bowling ball kind of a guy. And TCU let Shedeur Sanders have 4.18 seconds to throw on pressured dropbacks. Can't do that against Donovan Smith. You got to get to him a lot earlier. You got to take away that threat. You got to force him to make a read. On the other side of the ball for TCU, Chandler Morris doesn't look great. Their play calling in the red zone is predictably not great. And I think that they have some athletes at the wide receiver room, but we've yet to see the vision come together for how those athletes are going to work on the field. That being said, TCU's offensive line lost a couple good players in Alana Lee and Steve Avila. So that is definitely a weakness. I think Houston's defense, not as bad as maybe it looked in the Rice game. I think they're sleepwalking a little bit. That was what I would call the strength of the team. I'm looking for how much Matthew Golden can exploit this TCU defense. Can we get a Smith to Golden big play or two? That's really what Houston's trying to count on early to really spread this TCU defense out. Currently, with that performance to Colorado, TCU is 128 in EPA per pass on defense.
Well, and this is interesting because, you know, Dana mentioned this in his press conference after the Rice game. He said maybe they're too excited about opening Big 12 play against TCU. It's an excuse, but it also might be real. It might be that they were overlooking Rice and looking ahead to this. This is a big deal for this school, and I'm sure the players have been told about how big of a deal it is by everybody they see on campus. So this is one I'm sure they've had circled. I suspect they will play better than what we've seen, and I'm still not completely confused. Well, I'm a little confused after the way they beat UTSA, and then we saw UTSA beat Texas State. So I know the transitive property doesn't work here, but I think Houston might be a little better than we're giving them credit for, and they just fell asleep against Rice.
Yeah, I think what I've said about this game earlier was like they just didn't show up until too late. They just got there after the meal had been served and couldn't recover. It's a cliche thing for a coach to say, hey, we're tanking this for next week, right? Like we were focused on the next matchup and we got it. And you look at Kansas State in 2022, for instance, they got stuck in the Tulane game. They sold out to beat Oklahoma and it worked. And all's well that ends well, but they did lose a game that they probably should have won because they didn't prep for it. And so there is some argument to that. That being said, you look at some of the market fundamentals with Houston and you think, okay, are you just going to flip a switch on and make Frank Harris throw 3 interceptions in a row? Do something absolutely bizarre that he's never done? Is that how you're going to win a game here? So I think that UTSA game should have gone the other way. My numbers have this by about 4.5. I'm actually going to disagree with them, and I'm going to take TCU as the to cover here. I think that Houston relied on way too much luck to even be in that UTSA game.
Well, also Frank Harris is hurt. That's the other piece of it. So that makes a difference. That said, I agree with all your logic. And I'm going to say that Houston just gets really excited and covers this spread. I don't know if they're going to win this game, but I'm going to say they're excited. They're in the Big 12. It's a huge moment. This first game of the Big 12. I've been looking at the different new schools and where they enter. So like Cincinnati gets Oklahoma at home next week. UCF goes to Kansas State next week. Those are tricky games for the team you think should win just because of that factor. So I am going to take Houston to cover. So we finally disagree on one.
I like it.
This is good. It's about time. Thank you so much for watching. Just a reminder, subscribe to this channel right here so you never miss an episode of Andy Staples on 3. And oh, by the way, watch all the other great videos on the On3 Sports YouTube channel.